All right. I'll introduce you to Professor Michael Noetel from the Queensland University in a second or two. But as I said, former Premier Dean Brown with us at about 10:30. Matthew Horder, interesting guy. He's written a book. Sadly, it's about his mother and father. The book is called The Day the Sky Fell. And John would be interested in this. It's a book about the long shadow cast by the destruction of the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 and the enduring impact of sudden violent loss on one family, his family's life, which is all very sad. Grief and memory. Can you imagine trying to make some sort of sense out of somebody shooting down a commercial airliner like that? Just unbelievable. And, Scott Smith's got to drop by. He's got a book out. We talked about it before, the South Australian Picture Theatre and Drive-Ins book, which is an amazingly big, beautifully prepared, beautifully, what can I call it, published, I suppose, book. It's beautifully presented. We'll talk about that later. He's got 1,000 stories. He really has. Give us a ring if you'd like to. 0491 65 68 60 is the telephone number. We would just love to have you on the show. Caroline just brought me the book, which we got last week. It's a hell of a big book, I tell you. Full of lovely pictures and nostalgia, and if you've got memories of the movies, the cinema, the drive-ins in particular, it will be a lovely book to buy and keep. And it's a coffee table book. As I say, beautifully written and beautifully presented. The Court of Public Opinion, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we call the program. JeremyCordeau.com, all around the world. And wherever you're listening to the program, we go everywhere. We get calls from all sorts of interesting places. Some 11 million of you. Thank you. God knows how you find us, but we are very grateful that you did. Associate Professor Michael Noetel, University of Queensland. It's the School of Psychology, the facility or the Faculty of Health, Medicine and Behavioural Science. Golly. Professor, how are you?
Jeremy, well, thank you.
Wonderful to talk to you.
Lovely to chat to you too.
How do you manage to be an expert on all of that?
Well, look, I try to be an expert on finding out what works, and I try to apply that to wherever we've got a really big, important problem. And look, you can't be an absolute expert on everything, but sometimes the methods that I've tried to pick up have been able to be applied in a whole range of domains.
Professor, I've got Gary and Tony.
Morning, Professor.
And Dr. John Bruni as well. They might jump in, so if you hear a different voice, you'll know you're among friends.
Okay, great.
You're also an expert on artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the most pressing problems that humanity's facing, figuring out a lot about how we navigate the next, 5 or 15 years. And I think it's really urgent that more people think about how we manage all of the risks that are coming, because they're coming so fast that I think a lot of industries and governments are being caught at a bit of a standstill.
Are there some areas you reckon where artificial intelligence just should not be allowed?
Look, I think that we're pretty good at society of figuring out where the taboos should be. Like, I think all of us know that we shouldn't be using AI to make pornographic images of people without their consent, right? Mm-hmm. I think that we agree that it, shouldn't be able to do mass domestic surveillance, right? Where the government can just scrape all of the telephone records and all of the emails and then try to, do a bit of a minority report and predict crimes before they happen. Like, we're quite good at those sorts of taboos. I think we're less good when there's like really strong commercial interest to try to get a technology that makes lots of money and put regulations around it when it sort of might be, stoke fear of slowing down the economy or something, or economic growth. So I think we're going to figure out how to manage the privacy concerns, the copyright, all of that sort of stuff. I'm a little more scared that we won't know how to manage, one company that controls just some massive swathe of the economy, or how Australia is going to manage if all of the biggest AI companies are in the US and we don't have any intellectual labor to contribute anymore. Like, these are the sorts of problems I'm quite nervous that we won't figure out.
Well, Dr. John is an expert on international affairs and things military and things naval and things political. Now, what happens if AI, John, what happens if AI gets involved in defence?
Oh, it already is very deeply involved.
Can
in
it be
defence.
trusted? Can it be trusted?
Well, at the moment, yes, because there's always a human being at the end of the kill chain. Although there are questions being raised in places like the Pentagon and in various other European capitals as to whether or not that's going to continue, because now the evolution of warfare is based on how quickly we can deploy artificial intelligence out there. And can the human operator step away from the permissive aspect of pressing the button? Can we trust the AI to do that by itself? Now, this is a debate that's happening all over the world, but I don't think we've got a clear answer to this. And I will ask, Michael, if you don't mind, the world is divided between three potential AI paths. You've got the wild frontier in the United States where anything goes and there's no regulation at all. You've got the Europeans that are so full of regulation that it's actually strangling their AI capacities in terms of entering the market. And then you've got the autocratic model that the Chinese are standing by, and they're now starting to field robots for policing and paramilitary capacities and stuff like that. Which of the three do you think Australia will ultimately follow? Because we're a consumer of this stuff. We're not a creator. Will we jump on board with the American Wild West, or do you think we're going to be more European as time goes on, attempting to regulate things that give us a bit of social heartburn?
That's a really good question. I think there are some risks in over-regulating, especially in areas that aren't that big of a concern, right? Like, I think there's a world in which Australia would be a really good place for us to have data centers. And if we put too many regulations around data centers, then, that's a huge chunk of our economic growth that could get cut off. And like the environmental damage from data centers is overblown. A lot of it comes from tubers that have major mathematical problems in them. And so I think there are some risks that we might get too European, to use your analogy. Yeah. I think the American challenge is an interesting one, because I don't think Americans want AI to take over as well, right? Like, if an AI takes over, or there's a, we lose control and there's a biological weapon, like, Americans get hurt too. And so I think there is I think the fear that the Americans have is that if they put regulation on their industry, that the third group you talked about, the autocratic governments, are going to take over, right? Or like win the AI race. And so I hope that, Australia, as someone who has a good relationship with both China and the US, can kind of help broker a relationship here. I was quite excited to hear the other day that President Trump and Xi Jinping are open to having conversations about putting some guardrails around the most severe risks. And so I think, we have been able to navigate this kind of technological advancement in the past with, airlines used to crash a lot and cars accidents used to happen a lot. And we'd put in sort of some sane regulations that mean we can still drive and fly, but knowing that, the car's not going to explode or the plane's not going to crash. And I think we need to be careful not to go too far, especially around the risks that don't really matter that much in comparison to the ones where, people who have won Nobel Prizes are saying in AI are saying we could lose control and this could kill all of us with more than a 10% chance. And that 10% chance would not be tolerated in any other industry, from food to pharmaceutical. So we just need to walk the tightrope that you're talking about.
This budget, though, might do something about startups. People might be a little bit reluctant in Australia to, start something up, knowing that there won't be the capital gain at the end that they were expecting, and indeed that people around this table here enjoyed and profited from.
Yeah, look, I haven't really thought too carefully about the way that the budget might this particular budget might stifle innovation. I still think, investing in a startup has very high expected value, right? Like there's a lot of chance that your startup's going to fail. But a lot of people have been able to build pretty incredible things, for example, using AI in the back end to solve problems that the big AI companies aren't solving themselves. And those can be incredibly profitable. This is the promise of AI, is that if we can, keep the tail risks down, like the risks of, something really bad happening, a huge cybersecurity event, for example. And there might be lots of flourishing startups in all of these areas that we want. There could be health startups, but, that could solve a whole lot of problems that we've got. The issue is that, so look, there is some risk that, these budgetary pressures might change tips, but honestly, I think at the end of the day, the upside from startups is so strong that the changes to the capital gain is probably relatively modest, having spoken to a few people who are in this space at the moment.
Gary?
Oh,
do you want to?
Oh, yes. Sorry. I would want to touch on a couple of things that you've raised. The first one is the notion of, this is now a multi-trillion-dollar, or will be a multi-trillion-dollar enterprise moving forward. It's almost like a bottomless bucket in terms of how much money the tech bros in Silicon Valley are going to make out of this, and various other places around the world that are dabbling with AI. You talk about people and societies being very commonsensical and being able to put rational laws forward, but where are those rational laws coming from? Because I'm not seeing it. And I will take a very mundane aspect, and that is education. Education, I've got young kids at school. They're all now running around with computers and laptops and, iPads and whatever. And they're very good at doing that. But of course, with algorithmic AI being as it is, the idea of cheating, the idea of original work, the idea of teachers being able to stay on top of a lot of this technology that's being rolled out without much thought, what kind of damage do you see happen as a consequence of really not having any barriers or no social controls over this level of technology? I don't see it. You must be seeing something that I'm not seeing. And I'd like you to sort of unpack that.
Yeah, good question. So I guess what I'm seeing is that education's never been perfect, and there's been a lot of problems with it for a long time. I think AI is putting in a whole lot of challenges. I have had to stop giving essays as an academic. Academics love giving essays. It's kind of our full-time sport. And I think there's no point asking students to do a written reflection anymore or get them to write an essay about some topic, because AI can do it so well. Now, it doesn't mean we don't want people to write. It doesn't mean we don't want them to think in writing. I've just had to start putting my writing into an exam where I can watch them doing the writing themselves rather than outsourcing their thinking. And I guess what I'm seeing is that I think most educators are seeing what I'm seeing. I know some schools are removing tech from their classroom so that than they were 5 years ago, because they realize if there is an iPad and there's an AI behind it, then students are offloading all of their thinking. I think there's a lot of teachers who won't. They'll take the lazy mode. They'll still put in essays in their curriculum, and that's a problem. But I guess I'm sort of looking at the reality that, there's always been pretty average teachers around, and that's a problem we've been trying to solve, and we will continue to work on it. I guess I'm not saying all of those things are not problems. I really sympathize with that. I think that we just have a bit of an immune system that tries to solve them, and we've been constantly kind of fighting this tug of war between technology on one hand, making some types of education more difficult, and everybody who genuinely sees those problems and wants to fix them immediately. My recollection was that people were worried that TV and radio were going to destroy education. I think it was Socrates or Aristotle who said that writing was going to destroy education because you would no longer have to remember things and just with paper. And, I guess I'm not saying that AI is not going to change education in a seismic way. I know writing did too. I just think that we are relatively good at managing those kinds of disruptions, and we're much less good at managing the sort of disruption where like the reason why those companies are worth trillions of dollars is because they are hoping to take all white collar work in the next 5 years. Like that's their ambition. And that's why companies are investing so much in this. And I don't know if we're ready for that, because the American government would quite like AI to be that powerful because it's obviously incredibly profitable.
But Michael, if we're rushing toward this uncertain outcome, and it's based on what we were discussing earlier, a cold war between AI systems, delivery systems, whether autocratic or free range or whatever you want to call it, the regulatory European style. People are running toward it at a full clip because it is a cold war. The Americans want to be on top, the Chinese want to be on top, the Europeans want to, exercise whatever control they have got. And so where does that leave us? Because if people are making money, if there is a technical cold war happening in terms of the rollout of AI, where are the guardrails? I don't see them. Again, you talk about them, but I don't see them. No. And I'd like to get more, of a nuanced kind of, all right, well, John, you're not seeing X, Y, and Z happen, because so far from the people that I've spoken to in the field, it's like, hey, it's all gung-ho, and we'll find out when we find out.
No, I maybe I misexpressed myself. I agree that the current guardrails are absolutely insufficient. And as I was sort of saying, like, if the risks from AI were in any other industry, every plane in the world would be grounded, right? If the risks were that high. I think one of the problems that we're doing is we're putting guardrails in areas that are important, but they're not catastrophic risks. So Queensland's putting in a law to outlaw the creation of deepfakes. That makes sense. I agree that we should do that. And it's just not a catastrophic risk that's going to kill everybody. And so we certainly need more guardrails. But the guardrails that we put in should not just be on the most immediate thing that comes to our mind. They really should be carefully chosen in a way that stops the most extreme risks. So as a concrete example, the most of this risk comes from really 5 companies, right, which is the 5 frontier model companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, pushing the frontier so far and so fast without any regulation on them. So there's currently nothing really stopping them just kind of hitting the accelerator. Now, having an international agreement that frontier companies should have, say, someone external do the evaluations to see if their models are safe would be pretty common sense. That's the way that we manage risk in the financial industry. You're not allowed to run a bank without someone else looking at your books to make sure you're not doing something that's risky. And that sort of thing would be very sensible here, to have some sort of third-party evaluation. There might be some people have proposed, that we just don't create something smarter than humans unless we can prove that it's safe and there's broad democratic buy-in. And that got a huge amount of support, and that's very publicly popular. There's 5 companies who would not like that because, that's their explicit mission, is to create something smarter than us. But, given the risks involved, I think that it is plausible that we could get an international agreement that we don't want to create things that are smarter than humans unless we can prove that they're safe. Now, how we enforce that requires a bunch of technical things like, controlling where the chips go. I think certainly having the chip export controls from the US to China made a lot of sense because it increased the margin that we could spend on safety, increased the margin in the race. You got time to put a seatbelt on when you're an extra 200 meters down the racetrack. So I think there are some mechanisms here. It's hard for Australia because the main thing we can do is try to broker international agreements. And that's difficult for the state government of Queensland to do. But there are conversations about what those agreements would look like, and those would fix the biggest kind of problems.
Something else I know you're interested in is this charity transparency. Tell me about that.
Well, I think it's great how many Australians give to charity. I think we give half per person compared to New Zealand, so we've still got a little bit to go if we want to more charitable than our neighbours. But I think that a lot of us try to have an impact with that charity. We really want to know that the money that we're giving is helping those that
yes,
that we're hoping to help. But there really isn't a lot of transparency from charities about how much impact they're having. And that just means that there's so much impact left on the table. We could do so much more good with our money if we knew what it was achieving.
Well,
but
why do you suppose that we don't have that transparency? Could it be that they don't want us to see?
I think that's not necessarily a bad answer. I think the hard thing is that a lot of charities don't know how impactful they are. They, for example, might, one of the classic examples here is that if you were trying to, they're like, oh, we should give textbooks. Now, the thing is that a lot of charities don't know how impactful textbooks are, or they might have a reputation for giving out textbooks without realizing that it's really not that effective. A lot of people don't need textbooks. They're not going to school in the first place because they've got worms. What they actually need is deworming treatment. Yeah. And if you look at the evidence, things like deworming is like 1,000 times more effective than giving textbooks. But it's not very convenient for the textbook charity to say, oh, by the way, we're not really doing that much good. So I think they do obfuscate a little bit, and it's expensive to measure it. And, it's quite hard for charities to change their mind and say, oh, we were doing textbooks and now we're doing deworming, because, well, the donors will get confused about, well, why was I giving the textbooks in the first place?
Wouldn't the most pertinent piece of information be how much of every dollar you give to this charity actually goes to the cause?
You might think that. And look, I think that to some extent, that does matter. There are some charities where only 20% ends up going to the cause, and that's obviously obscene. But if I sort of think about why you might worry about that, it's because if you think it's going to management or think you think it might be reducing the... Yeah. Exactly. You think it might be reducing the impact it has. But really what you care about isn't the overhead, it's the impact. What you care about is that is it making someone's life better? And sometimes high administration can reduce that impact. But what I don't think enough about is how impactful the actual program is that is being delivered. Yeah. So as one example, the US government gives a lot of money to foreign aid, and some of it's like workforce training programs, trying to help people start businesses and stuff. But they weren't sure it was working, so they actually tried just giving the cash to the people instead of training them. And cash was better across almost all metrics that they measured. And so we don't often think about how, impactful this is. We don't think about, is it better than just giving the person the money? And I think that's the question that matters most is this charity making a difference? And how well can they prove it to you? They're just giving you the cherry-picked, glossy sort of images of a cute kid and sort of telling you that it works without giving you any real data. We wouldn't buy that in medicine. And there's a bunch of psychological biases that make it hard when it comes to charity. But I guess I expect the same evidence of the charities that I give to than I do of my doctor who's giving me a treatment too. Mm.
Yeah, those ads that you see endlessly, mostly on daytime television, they're ads for animal cruelty, and they are produced slick, and you think to yourself, okay, now I hate the idea of this bear living in that cage all its life and being poked and being bled of its bile and all of those things. It's very emotive, and I can see people saying, well, I'll give my $5 a week. I'll do that. But I really think there's no way we can check up and see who is behind that charity. We don't know whether the money that you give, $5 every week, is going to do anything.
I certainly think it's too hard for us mug punters to make that decision, right? If we're giving to charity, the amount of effort that's involved in figuring out whether that, animal welfare charity is doing a good job is so high. What is available, which most people don't know about, is that there's independent evaluators. So for animal welfare, there's this place called Animal. Yeah. And they go and find the ones that actually are making the biggest difference for animals. For global health and poverty, there's GiveWell. For almost all charity types, there are people who actually look at the research for you and find where is this going to go the furthest. And so sometimes that leads to counterintuitive conclusions. Yep. But yeah, you can't do this yourself. It's too hard. So I guess I think it's nice that we get that emotional pull to help others from the glossy ad, but I think we should also try to direct it in the place that is helping the most animals or people. And I think it's too hard for us to make that judgment by ourselves. So have a look at the charity evaluators that actually look at the research for you, in the same way that you ask a doctor to look at the research about how to best treat your health.
You were talking about guardrails before with regard to AI. I mean, what really are the guardrails for charity? Because last time I looked, it was a $222 billion a year industry.
Yeah, look, there is the ACNC, which is the charity regulator.
Yeah.
And they just make sure that, you say that you're doing what you said you were going to do.
Yeah.
And they do sort of hold the registration, meaning like so full disclosure, I'm on the board of a charity, but for us to get registered, they were the ones who gave us the tick or the rubber stamp.
Yeah.
But being honest, they don't look at our charity to be like every year and say, how much impact you're doing. They don't ask us for any trials about whether it's working or not.
No.
They're just making sure that we're not buying a yacht with it, And so, but even then, we get externally audited and sort of most charities, and that's also to make sure that we're not buying yachts. But it really doesn't. It doesn't critique us if we spend a lot of money on fundraising, which we don't for the record, but some do. They don't care. They don't sort of necessarily critique that.
Do you think there should be a law that says, you can't spend too much or any more than this on advertising and promotion? And, oh, by the way, you must give a public accounting as to how successful we are at what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a law is one option. I'm not sure. I haven't really thought through the consequences of that, because in the same way that we want, startup companies, sometimes small charities turn into big charities and they can end up doing a big difference. And I don't know how to manage the two things. Yeah. I just think we as people who want to be generous and really want to make people's lives better as a result, there's some degree of skepticism is okay. But I don't think that should stop us from giving, because we can save a life for like $5,000. That's like what spent on our last holiday. And that means certifiably saving a life. When people say you can save one for 50 cents, that's a lie. That isn't true. But, you can find really effective charities if you have a look at places like GiveWell. And they've got so much due diligence on how impactful different interventions are. And so I guess what I'm saying to people is, use that urge to give and to make the world a better place. Don't let the doubt get in your way, because there are ways of finding out for sure where you can have an impact. And do be skeptical of the options.
Don't be too cynical. You've given us a lot of wonderful time, Professor. Just before you go, you talked about the essay and how useless it was these days. What do you replace the essay with in your lecture hall?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, my students are completing an assessment at the moment where they're given a controversial topic and they have to argue both sides of it so well. I don't know what side they started on. And I think that really tests their critical thinking. It tests whether they can, not just fight for their party line or, debate from one side. Do they really understand this topic well enough that someone from either side thinks they're treating it fairly? Yeah. And I think things like that test students' critical thinking much better than an essay did in the first place. So in some ways, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think it's the case, at least in my classroom.
God bless you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Lovely chatting to all of you. Bye for now.
Wonderful to talk to you. Professor Michael Noetel, University of Queensland, School of